Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hal Lindsey Report. It used to be known as Great Britain. Even today, the pretensions of greatness remain. When President Donald Trump met with Queen Elizabeth last week, he briefly and inadvertently walked ahead of her. Video of the incident shows that he was not trying to insult her. He was following her instructions. Nevertheless, monarchists around the world flew into a frenzy. They declared that he had insulted the Queen. Meanwhile, protesters in London were flying a balloon that depicted the President of the United States as a giant baby in a diaper. Of the two events, which one was meant to be insulting? Then, a liberal London tabloid, The Mirror, squealed with fake fury over President Trump's sitting in an armchair once used by Winston Churchill. The headline read, "How dare you?" The newspaper quoted Ruth Schmeath, a member of Parliament. She said, "Churchill embodied the best of British spirit when we were fighting and defeating racists and fascists during World War II. Given Trump's appalling actions and rhetoric, he doesn't even deserve to look at a statue of Churchill, let alone sit in his seat." She says President Trump is unworthy to even gaze upon statues of Churchill. Wonder if this liberal politician knows anything about the late Prime Minister. During World War II, Churchill repeatedly said that the Allies were fighting for what he called Christian civilization. For instance, on June 18, 1940, he said, "I expect that the Battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization." In 1946, he presented a list of what he thought should be the main objective of Britain's Conservative Party. The first was to uphold the Christian religion and resist all attacks upon it. Today, Christianity in Britain is under assault from the schools, the courts, law enforcement, and from the UK's fastest growing religion, Islam. It's fashionable to put down Christians and praise Muslims. To say anything negative against Islam is equated with racism, even though Islam is not a race. It is a set of religious, political, and social ideas, but it is politically incorrect to even discuss the ramifications of those ideas. It can be a crime because Donald Trump has been forthright in talking about the dangers of radical Islam. The British see him as a racist. They conveniently forget that a major critic of Islam happened to be one Winston Churchill. In 2014, a man running for Parliament was arrested for publicly reading the words of Churchill on the topic of the Muslims. Today, London is riddled with gangs and a fast-rising crime rate, even higher than New York's. Though London has virtually no guns, its murder rate is also higher than New York's. Much of the problem comes from Muslim immigration. French intelligence agents began calling the city Londonistan. Back in the 1990s, they saw how it had become a base of operation for Islamic extremist groups. Intelligence agencies are required to take a long view of history. It is their job to recognize the trends that will come to play in the decades to come. In this case, their warnings from the 1990s are coming true right now. Today, London is a major planning and staging area for global terrorism, and it is a haven for the terrorists themselves. While it is true that most Muslims are not terrorists, large numbers of them turn into terrorists for a reason. The Quran is an often violent book. It is full of directions to be violent against those with whom you disagree. Britain once had a great tradition of debating both religion and politics. Such a debate does not violate human rights. One of the ironies is that the same people who see Islam as above discussion have no problem with attacking Christianity and the Bible on a regular basis. Maybe they feel freer to speak their minds because the Knights of Columbus aren't likely to behead them. Maybe they feel safe attacking people whose leaders taught them to love their enemies. We shouldn't be surprised. Jesus warned that there would be persecution for his followers, and that will get worse as his return draws near. At photo ops, world leaders usually smile and offer platitudes. But last week, over a ceremonial breakfast at the beginning of the NATO summit, Donald Trump broke with tradition and said what was on his mind. His outspokenness made many people feel uncomfortable, but saying it publicly seemed to strengthen his position. He came away from the summit with more than his critics expected. Germany was his main target. The president complained about Germany's deal with Russia for a new pipeline called Nord Stream 2. It will feature a pair of 800-mile-long pipelines running beneath the Baltic Sea. Currently, much of Europe's natural gas passes through the Ukraine, Poland, and other former Soviet bloc nations. Russia can't cut off gas to those nations without also cutting off Europe. The new pipelines will give them more specific leverage over their former allies, now considered enemies. But an even bigger problem is just how deeply it puts Germany into Russia's pocket. Last year, Bloomberg wrote, "Germany is addicted to Russian gas." Last week, President Trump said,
"But Germany, as far as I'm concerned, is captive to Russia because it's getting so much of its energy from Russia. So we're supposed to protect Germany, but they're getting their energy from Russia." Explain that.
In this case, addicted and captive amount to the same thing. While Germany has been urging the United States to take a tough stance against Russia, the German government was making a sweet deal for itself with the Russians. Starting in 2020, Germany will control the distribution of most of Europe's natural gas supplies from Russia. That will make Europe captive to Germany and Germany captive to Russia. But Russia's grand plan faces a big challenge: Israel. In December of last year, Cyprus, Greece, Italy, and Israel signed a deal. They will build a pipeline under the Mediterranean Sea from Israel to and through each of these countries. It should be operational by 2025. It will be capable of supplying much of the natural gas that these and other European nations need. It will mitigate Europe's dependence on Russia. If you've ever wondered why there are Russian troops on the ground in Syria, this may be the answer. Preservation of Russia's natural gas monopoly in Europe may wind up being the hooks in the jaws of God that God will one day use to pull it from the north to do battle with Israel. The president's other big complaint was that NATO members are not pulling their own weight on defense. Germany has one of the most powerful economies in the world. It has a $69 billion trade surplus with the United States alone, and yet the U.S. foots the bill for much of Germany's defense. The U.S. has 35,000 armed forces personnel stationed in Germany right now. After the Cold War, the Clinton administration led the United States in a major cutback of defense spending. It was known as the peace dividend. Most NATO nations have enjoyed a peace dividend for decades. The U.S. pays the bill and the rest of NATO gets the dividend. If they get into trouble, they have Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty to keep them safe. Article 5 requires the other members of NATO to come to the defense of a member nation. It's something like health insurance. Even if you don't need it this month, you pay your premium because you might need it next month. And if you're self-employed, your health insurance premium may be one of your biggest monthly expenses. Imagine a benefactor paying that bill for you. That's essentially what the United States does. Germany is a rich country with one of the world's best economies. Why are we paying their insurance? By the time President Trump left the summit, the NATO nations had agreed to increase their individual spending on defense. He says he got what he wanted. But here's where things get really interesting. The Bible tells us that near the end of this age, a ruler will unite Europe into a revived Roman Empire. He will quickly build a massive military machine and effectively take over the world. But over the last few decades, military spending in Europe has been anemic. That was already changing before this summit, but it now seems to be revving into high gear. This may turn out to be a major step toward arming the Antichrist. In Matthew 24, Jesus gave a list of signs that the end of the age is approaching. The things he spoke of come to full fruition during the tribulation, but they are beginning right now. In Matthew 24, verse 12, Jesus said, "Lawlessness will abound." During the tribulation, Antichrist will be in power. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 calls him the man of lawlessness. That will represent the full blossoming of an age of lawlessness. But lawlessness is already at work, and it's getting worse by the day. Over the last weeks, we learned that America's drift into lawlessness is much further along than anyone thought. A cancer of corruption has taken hold at the highest level of American law enforcement. I think we've only seen the tip of the iceberg, but it's enough. In July of 2015, Agent Peter Strzok led the FBI's counter-espionage section. His team supposedly investigated former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's illegal use of a personal unsecure email server. Agent Strzok also led the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. That included allegations that the Trump campaign solicited aid from Russia. In July of 2016, the FBI informed Congress that the Clinton investigation had closed. 2 months later, in September, Agent Strzok learned about the contents of former Congressman Anthony Weiner's laptop computer. Weiner's wife, Huma Abedin, was Mrs. Clinton's top aide. While investigating charges that Weiner had sent lewd texts to a 15-year-old North Carolina girl, the FBI seized this laptop. He eventually pled guilty to the charge, but when the FBI went through his laptop, they found more than sexting messages. They found 140,000 emails that they deemed important to the previous Clinton email investigation. They had been sent to Weiner's laptop by Huma Abedin. The problem was, if the FBI reopened the Clinton email investigation, it would have to tell Congress. Less than 2 months before the general election, and to tell Congress a secret is like holding a press conference. The news would leak within minutes. Strzok and other senior agents at FBI headquarters should have immediately reopened the Clinton investigation. They should have done it with the moment the new information came their attention. But they didn't. They sat on it for almost a month. Why? Apparently, so it would not damage candidate Clinton's election prospects. All America now knows that Agent Strzok hated Donald Trump and despised Trump voters. He texted a colleague with whom he was having an extramarital affair that he could smell Trump voters at a Virginia Walmart. He put smell in all capital letters at one point. The colleague asked in a panic, "Trump's not ever going to become president, right? Right?" Strzok responded, No, he won't. We'll stop it." It's obvious that he meant that either the FBI or he and other rogue agents in the FBI intended to stop Trump from being president. He now says that he did not mean the FBI would try to stop Trump's election. Then, who did he mean? But according to the evidence, that's exactly what happened. At one point, Strzok worried that Trump might win despite their efforts. He argued that they needed an insurance policy in case that happened. He texted, "I want to believe that there's no way he gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. What did he mean by insurance policy? Did he mean they should come up with something they could hold over the Trump presidency if he won? If so, and it appears to be so, that alone casts a shadow over the entire Russian collusion investigation. In an apparent attempt to help the Clinton campaign, senior FBI leadership delayed restarting the email investigation. But they had a problem. Agents at the New York FBI field office were the ones who found the emails. They pressed the issue. Even the New York Police Department threatened to go public with it. Finally, the leaders at FBI headquarters did what they should have done a month earlier. They reopened the investigation. Ironically, the delay wound up hurting Clinton instead of helping her. William Salatin, writing in the liberal Slate magazine, said, FBI bias did affect the election, and the bias was, in a sense, pro-Clinton. But the bias didn't help Clinton. It destroyed her. Regardless of the outcome, Peter Strzok's words and actions showed a willingness to use the FBI's vast resources and authority to intervene in a U.S. presidential election. Both Republicans and Democrats should find this deeply disturbing, but the Democrat Party doesn't seem to be bothered by it. We expect Russia to try to undermine faith in America's democratic process, but not the FBI. For many Americans, Strzok and his pals represented what some call the deep state. But a deep state entrenched within a government is not new in history. Many times we have seen a group of subordinates take it on themselves to undo the policy of legitimate officials. Many of the problems that still resonate in the Middle East had their beginning in just such an uprising. Last week, I discuss the other Palestinian refugees, the Jews, displaced from Arab nations. In that story, I mentioned that Britain kept backing out of the promises it had made to the Jews. That's why 75% of the land promised to them by the League of Nations eventually went to create a new Palestinian Arab nation called Jordan. Much of the British attitude came from pure prejudice against Jews. Others within British Foreign Service wanted the Jewish state to fail. In the light of their imperial ambitions in the Middle East, they preferred working with the Arabs rather than the more independent-minded Jews. When British General Edmund Allenby walked reverently into Jerusalem, leading his Army of Liberation on December 9, 1917, he was ready to institute a military government. Unfortunately, the staff of Governor Ronald Storr was riddled with Army officers who did not believe in the principles set out in the Balfour Declaration. They represented the deep state of that day. Without authorization, they reversed the official policy of their government and sabotaged the mandate given by the League of Nations. Had this been investigated and prosecuted at the time, it would have been considered a crime at best and treason at worst. These men betrayed the official policy of their government. Let me give you a disastrous example of this group's action. Governor Storr decided to placate the spiritual leader of the Jerusalem Muslims, Hajj Amin al-Husseini. But it didn't work. Al-Husseini continued to hate the British long after their effort to appease him. In the build-up to World War II, he led the 1936 to 1939 Arab revolt in Palestine. To evade arrest, he left the area in 1937. According to Wikipedia, he established himself in fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. During World War II, he collaborated with both Italy and Germany by making propagandistic radio broadcasts and by helping the Nazi recruit Bosnian Muslims for the Waffen-SS. Al-Husseini told his fellow Muslims that they and the Germans shared the principles of family, order, the leader, and faith. He stayed in Germany as the guest of Adolf Hitler. He wanted to learn how to deal with the Jewish problem. Underlings often change the course of history. Today, we call them the deep state. They are the glue that holds things together, or the weak links that cause things to fall apart. But there is good news in all this. If a few people can get together and change the course of history, then imagine how much more we can do when we get together with God as our ally. This is especially true when we share the good news about Jesus coming to die for our sins. When we do that, the infinite power of the living God flows through us into the world. Romans 1 verse 16 says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes." Everyone includes you. God is offering salvation to you right now. All you have to do is acknowledge to God that you are a sinner and ask Him for His forgiveness. The Bible says that He will freely forgive anyone who asks with genuine sincerity. When you do that, He will grant you the pardon that Jesus bought for you with His death on Calvary's cross. Don't wait. Do it now. That's it for tonight, folks. I'll see you next week, God willing.
You've been watching the Hal Lindsey Report. To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470-470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit hallindsey.com or call 1-888-RAPTURE.